Good morning, everybody. I hope you have a good rest after a nice dinner with good music yesterday. So we have, this morning, we are going to conclude our work with two workshops. The first one is reserved to the economical side and the implications on Iraq. So with a different aspect, we have three prominent speakers about that. Mihaela, who is going to talk about oil. Then Paul will develop on the financial side, as well as concluding with Sabah. The second one, we will reserve it also to something which is a catastrophe in Iraq, is the humanitarian situation in Iraq, with the problem of human rights, minorities' rights, and we will have also prominent speakers about that. So we'll begin this speaker with Mihaela first. She's going to make a presentation. Then we will open a debate with questions and answers. Please, Mihaela.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me, and at the same time to congratulate them for this initiative, because I think that Peace Ambassadors for Iraq is an organization that must exist, and they have to work in order to put again side by side these two words, peace and Iraq. The interventions recorded yesterday during the first day of the conference addressed the Iraqi issues almost only from the political point of view. Therefore, please allow me to briefly present several economic aspects generated by the current situation in Iraq and in the entire region. Why is the Iraqi economy important in the context of this conference and for the rest of the world? Well, first, because we live in a globalized world and economy. We wanted this, we worked to make it happen, but we also must admit that the globalization brings more risks for worldwide economy when conflicts and turmoil appear in any corner of the world. Second, because we are talking here about the country that holds, according to the US Energy Information Administration, the world's fifth largest proven crude oil reserve and the second largest crude oil producer in OPEC in 2014. If we like it or not, any developed or developing country needs significant amounts of energy resources. So why Iraq was attractive for ISIS? By targeting ISIS, ISIS has made a strategic move. First of all, they speculated the unstable political environment in the northern Iraq. They needed fighters and supporters, and they knew that political environment in the North Iraq will allow them to find, in an easy way, fighters in that part of the world, because there the dissatisfactions are high. In addition, they found supporters in a rich territory, which means also economic support for their organization. In other words, ISIS had chosen Iraq because they found an easy access to two resources important in any organization, be it economic or not, the human resource and the financial potential. I will not present you again how the events developed, and I will want to answer to another question. What is the current situation of Iraq's oil industry in this context? Let's remember here that Iraq has 8 supergiant oil fields. 6 of them are in the southern Iraq, and they represent 60% of country's proven oil reserves. The remaining 2 are located in the north and central part of the country. Despite the ISIS issue, Iraq increased its oil production in 2014 and has become the nation adding more new oil to global markets than any other supplier in OPEC. The Western investment and the ready availability of US drilling equipment denied before because of sanctions against the government of Saddam Hussein helped Iraq in increasing its production. However, the rise of ISIS has forced Iraqi government to spend money on armed forces and on the rehabilitation of millions of refugees, while the falling oil prices did not generate a significant growth of Iraqi government revenues, despite the increasing production. Yet, Iraq faced many challenges in meeting the planned timetable for oil production, as the EIA mentions. One of the major obstacles is the inadequate storage, pumping, and pipeline capacity or the midstream infrastructure in the south to facilitate larger export volumes. Iraq does not have more than 7 days of storage capacity.
Mihaela, I'm sorry to interrupt you because the interpreter needs, if you can speak slowly.
I'm sorry, okay. So Iraq faced many challenges in meeting the planned timetable for oil production. One of the major obstacles is the inadequate storage, pumping, and pipeline capacity in the south to facilitate larger export volumes. Iraq does not have more than 7 days of storage capacity. As a result, when poor weather conditions hit the Persian Gulf, or if any event causes Iraq's exports to stop, production at the oil fields would also have to be stopped because of the insufficient storage capacity. Fortunately, Iraq's ability to export its crude oil is through its network of pipelines and ports, which are currently largely unaffected by ISIS. In terms of pipelines, ISIS has little control over the current infrastructure. After all, it seems that on short term, ISIS' impact on Iraq's oil industry is not very important. Why? Because ISIS' control of Iraq is largely concentrated in the north and northwestern Iraq, while Iraq's top producing oil fields and export infrastructure are in the south. However, there is a risk for Iraq's oil importing countries in case ISIS will go further south. Therefore, these countries may need to start looking at other suppliers, so Iraq risks to lose customers. In the long term, the situation is quite different. It is possible that the true impact of ISIS on Iraq's oil industry do not be felt for a few years. Before the ISIS offensive in Iraq, the International Energy Agency predicted that almost half of the world's global oil production growth through 2030 will be determined by Iraqi production. Under these circumstances, Iraq will hardly achieve these goals. Iraq needs investment, infrastructure, and human capital to achieve their oil export dreams. This applies to the entire chain of the oil industry, from downstream exploration and production to midstream pipelines and to upstream refining. Iraq has a severe lack of resources, making the country's economic growth extremely vulnerable in the years to come. At the same time, the world markets are facing increased demand for oil. We can expect Iraq's oil production and export capacity to stay stagnant, which means that global crude oil prices may dramatically increase over the next decade, even if right now we can see the Brent crude, an international benchmark, fell 48% last year. Is there any impact on other countries outside Iraq? Of course it is. The trade between Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan is slowing down due to the rise of ISIS. The conflict has already damaged the oil pipeline from Kirkuk to Turkey, stopping the oil flow. Though the impact of the conflict has not been as bad as expected, since oil prices haven't increased as rapidly as initially projected, which has kept Turkey's finances under control, the trade between Iraq and Turkey is likely to suffer. Turkey runs a huge trade surplus with Iraq, which is likely to slow down dramatically due to lower demand from Iraq. Trade routes between the two have also been impacted due to the conflict, leaving trucks from Turkey no option but to take the longer route via Iran to reach southern Iraq, which reduces profitability to zero or below. Jordan and Lebanon have both absorbed a large number of refugees due to the emergence of ISIS, coupled with the Syrian civil war. Almost 20% of Jordan's exports go to Iraq, and ISIS' presence on the border of Jordan could lead to a flare-up of violence, since ISIS has publicly threatened the region. This could lead Jordan to divert resources towards the mobilization of its army. And its government debt is already notable, and budget deficit would widen further even at a large scale, in case of any large-scale conflict. Regarding Iran, falling oil prices have definitely provided serious consequences for Iran's economy. Iran needs oil prices to be well above $100 per barrel for it to balance its budget, but with oil price below $100, it would need to cut spending or compensate for the lost revenue by reducing subsidies. Regarding Europe, Europe faces right now more a social issue than an economic one. Why? Because Europe is currently facing significant problems at the south and southeast border of Schengen area in Italy and also in Greece regarding the migration of people from the conflict areas. I would like to conclude that we have to admit that the current situation in Iraq and in the region concerns all of us, because on long term it will be a problem for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your illuminating statement. I would like, we all know the importance of oil in Iraq, but of course there are other problems about corruption, about so many things. And this is why I would like Paul to comment a little bit on these issues.
I thought this was a really interesting presentation. How does the West and other Gulf countries help Iraq to develop its oil infrastructure further, to increase that storage capacity that you talked about?
I think that I already said Iraq needs investment. So if the Western investors will find an environment, a proper environment for investment in Iraq, then Iraq will be able to develop its storage capacity in the south. So in this case, the export activity will have no damage.
And so that then leads to the fact that the government in Baghdad needs to put together an investment package and work especially about countering corruption, which is huge throughout the country, in dealing in a systemic way to increase investment within the country.
When I'm talking about an investment environment, it means everything. Politically, from the political point of view, geographical point of view, social point of view, but most of all, I think we have to think to a peaceful environment and a place where investors are not afraid to come, not only because of the conflict, but also because of not losing their investments.
And so what we have seen in the last few years in Iraq then is that the government itself has created its own problem by being corrupt, by using militias. They are creating destabilization throughout the whole country and actually inviting in insurgencies and inviting in terrorist groups such as Daesh to be an alternative that seems to be almost better than what they're getting from the Baghdad government.
So, yes, but as I said, the government planned to increase the production no matter what, and they consider, as much as I know, that the lower price oil will be, they will work hard to increase the production because they have to cover the gap between the expenses and the revenues needs of the government from the increasing of oil production. Regarding the corruption, I think this is an issue that can be resolved only from the inside.
I always find the sort of the oil market really interesting because as more oil comes on tap in Iraq, the price globally will be lowered. And so they have to produce even more.
Well, it does not always happen like this because the oil market does not respond to the ordinary laws of the economy. So it is not a report between offer and demand on the oil market. There are so many factors that are involved in establish a price oil at the global market. And one of the factors is the conflict area. But I would like to mention here that the Arab Spring did not determine a very high level of the oil price. At the same time, when the financial crisis starts in 2008, OPEC decided to increase the production because the oil price was too high. And even so, the oil price did not started to go down. So we are talking here, when we are talking about the oil market, we are talking a lot about speculators, and not only about investments. So it is not so easy to decide or to say, okay, if the production will increase, the price will go down more. It is not true.
Now, if we add, other specific problem to Iraq, the relation between the government in Baghdad, for example, and the KRG, and the dispute concerning oil, with the current prices, so they are heading much more. Of course, we have also the problem of corruption, so heading for a catastrophe if things are going to continue the same way.
You mean if the oil price will continue to go down? As I know, OPEC decided to organize a meeting regarding the future strategy about the oil price and the production, and this will be soon.
Yeah, but this is for everybody, but in the specific case of Iraq, when we add the...
for any oil production country, a very low price is not a good thing.
Okay, let me turn to Sabah, to see his comments about this specific problem.
Well, how would you view the use of the revenues, the oil revenues in Iraq, at the present time, say in the last 10 years, compared to the 10 years before, in terms of utilization of the revenues for infrastructure, for the needs of the nation? How does it look like to you, the figures?
I think that Iraq had some problems regarding the investments from its own revenues in the last years, because after the war, Iraq government faced other important issues like reconstruction. And the Western investment were those that were expected to develop the infrastructure from the oil production point of view.
No, my question is on the utilization nationally. You have the revenue, which comes from the oil, so that you can use it for the infrastructure, for the use of the people, paying salaries, and the rest of the expenses that any government face. There is this current situation, say, in the last 10 years, compared to 10 years before.
You mean 10 years before the war?
Yes.
If we take a look at the Iraq revenues in the last 20 years, we will see that the exports are growing and then are going down, exactly, obviously, in the periods of the two wars that Iraq had. So if the government wanted to make investments, the only period available good for this were the periods between the wars that were very, very short. In a normal situation, a government will spend the revenues from the oil production to investments in oil production. But when the situation, the normal situation does not exist, I don't think the government could spend the revenues in oil production when they have some other issues on local environment.
I think I'll move it to another point, because you're talking about the utilization of funds for the oil industry, within the oil industry. And I was trying to find out how the revenues were utilized for the nation, for the use of the people. But let's move to another one, which Ambassador Lamani has raised about the KRG. Can you indicate to us what is the position now, as you see it, in terms of the conflict between the KRG, that's the Kurdish area, and the federal government, in terms of the export, in terms of the oil, the fields, and in terms of the pipelines?
Yes, as far as I know, there is an agreement signed between the federal government and the other side, and they agreed to that that federal government will receive a part from the will receive the amount of the exports and will redistribute the a percent to the Kurds.
Okay, thank you.
This is what
I think there is the agreement, but this agreement is not holding. So let's move to another point.
Okay, so
I think it's really interesting in a lot of countries how they actually spend their oil revenues, and I think that's a really interesting point. You know, if you look at Norway, for example, where they put the vast amounts in a sovereign fund to do infrastructure issues and not necessarily to pay ongoing government normal expenditure. And I think Iraq may be in a similar situation where it will have to think about putting the vast amount of oil revenue into infrastructure and to sovereign wealth fund and look at developing its own economy, internal economy, for the dynamism that will need to be created for normal government revenues and salaries, etc.
This is precisely what I was trying to get from Mihaela, because at the present moment, the income from oil, more than half of it, more than 50% of it, is utilized as salaries, forgetting about all the other factors. But if you look at it in terms of figures, more than 50% is just being paid as salaries. So it leaves nothing for the other expenditure, let alone sovereign fund, let alone investment, let alone for future projects.
And if we've seen the price of oil dropping 50%, you know, salaries have not gone down 50%. So, you know,
what they have done on the salaries, there is a decree from Abadi that salaries will be delayed for all the employees by 10 days. So instead of paying the monthly salary at the end of the month, it will be paid on the 10th of next month. But this does not apply neither to the president or presidency or the prime minister or the members of parliament or the government or the other people who are working on that one. So it's the other people who are bearing the brunt of
The
this.
ones who will actually suffer.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, let me turn to the audience if there are any comments or, yes, please, first.
Yeah, 2 points. I think Sabah was trying to say, you know, why, if Iraq is the 5th biggest oil producer in the world, is it also the 3rd poorest country in the world? I mean, this is a question which leads straight back to the corruption issue, which has to be resolved. But I'm more interested in Iran. You said that Iran requires over $100 a barrel for Brent crude to break even with its budget, to balance its budget. Iran has just, in the last month, agreed a 50% increase in its defense budget, which of course has to cover the funding of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Shia militias, which are being funded and led by the Iranians in Iraq, the nuclear enrichment program, as well as all the massive payments that go to the IRGC in terms of their own type of corruption. How can they afford to continue to do this when Brent crude fell to $47, although it has risen to $67 this week, so it seems to be going back up. But with bread prices increasing by 30% last month in Iran and people protesting on the streets, how are they going to manage their economy?
Well, unfortunately, I don't know exactly what is the government economic policy in Iran. If we are talking strictly about the economic law, this is not possible. It means a huge deficit. So I don't know exactly what are their proposals and what is their policy regarding the covering the deficit created by these increments, expenses. I don't know exactly.
Okay, Dr. Hafi.
أنا حبيت فقط أذكر بالأرقام.
I would like you to mention in number with figures, using figures.
I don't have the...
Could you?
Headphones, please.
I mean, while we're waiting, I think you've hit on a very good point on the Iranian economy. I think it's incredibly important to speak directly to the Iranian people to say your government is making these bad choices. You know, the government has a choice whether to invest in its own people or to cause trouble around the world. They can't do both at this price. And I think it's incredibly important to explain this to the Iranian people, that it's their government making this choice.
Okay.
طيب بالنسبة للأرقام المحددة الآن ضمن
In relation to
رواتب
the
مجلس النواب
figures,
المعلنة
it was mentioned
من ميزانية العام الحالي
particularly with the budget this year,
هذا $30,000 شهريا
300
مع
30,000
حمايات 30 شخص ومخصصات إيفاد وطعام. نسبة الرواتب اللي يتقاضاها شهريا
the monthly pay wage received by the parliament,
$11 مليون.
it is 11 million
هذا يعني
including
خلال
what they're
السنة الواحدة
receiving
مجموع رواتبهم
with the guards,
132
which means
مليون دولار.
132
خلال دولة
million
برلمانية
in
واحدة
total, that is
يتقاضون 528 مليون دولار مع عدم احتساب راتب رئيس مجلس النواب والنواب اللي يتقاضون $50,000 شهريا. أي أن أعضاء البرلمان يكلفون من حصة النفط نخصص إحنا شهريا 1000 برميل من النفط تصدير بالأسعار الحالية حتى نسدد راتب نائب واحد فقط. احنا نسدد حوالي مبلغ خلال دولة برلمانية واحدة ما مقدار 17 مليون برميل و600 ألف برميل لتصدير العراق حتى نسدد رواتب البرلمانية. وزارة التعليم العالي فقط مقارنة اللي هي مختصة ب 20 جامعة، ميزانية رواتب مجلس النواب تساوي 70% من ميزانية وزارة التعليم العالي خلال سنة واحدة. فقط رواتب مجلس النواب 70% من ميزانية وزارة التعليم العالي اللي هي تشرف على 20 جامعة حاليا وترسل بعثات الدكتوراه. هذه فقط مقارنة بطريقة صرف عوائد النفط بالأرقام المذكورة من وزارة التخطيط.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear from the beginning.
No, he made a comment much more than question.
So it was a comment. Okay.
Okay,
thank you. If it is possible, you can give me that numbers later. Okay, or tell me from where did you take it. Okay, thank you very much.
أنا أيضا أتكلم بالعربي. من المعروف أن العراق يمكن أن نسميه أغنى بلد في الشرق الأوسط.
country in the Middle East.
أن العراق فيها
and because Iraq has got many resources,
أي بلد إلا السعودية يمكن، وأيضا من الماء والأرض.
water.
فالعراق معروف يعني من هذا الجانب. لكن
it's very rich in different
قرأت أيضا في الصحف وأعتقد أن هذه الأرقام صحيحة أن خلال حكومة مالكي هذه الفترة العراق حصل على 473 مليار دولار من النفط. فالسؤال هو أين ذهبت هذه الأموال؟ إذا سمحتم لي أنا فقط أقرأ لكم شيئين من خبرين من التحقيقات الذي حصل في هذا المجال. خبر جاء في صحيفة في مجلة نيويوركر الأمريكية، عمل تحقيق عن ما يجري في العراق. وجاء في هذا المقال حول قاسم سليماني ونشاطه في العراق وفي الشرق الأوسط. يقول: قد أصبح في حكم المعروف للجميع أن هذا الرجل يمارس نفوذه التسلطي على رجال الحكم عبر شتى الوسائل ومنها دفع الرشاوى. وإن لم نجد فالتهديد يجد فالتهديد والترهيب في حال الضرورة، علما بأن الميزانية الضخمة التي تحت تصرف سليماني ليست كلها من إيران. فإذا أخذنا بعين الاعتبار أن حكومة المالكي تخصص مردود 200,000 برميل من النفط يوميا وتعمل على تحويله إلى سليماني، وهو يقدر حوالي 20 مليون دولار تسعير السوق بعد 10 سنوات من الاحتلال. فبهذه الطريقة من التمويل السري يجري تعزيز فيلق القدس ذاته في مواجهة تأثير العقوبات الاقتصادية على القدس. هذا جاء في نيويورك. مدخول 200 برميل من النفط اللي يساوي 20 مليون دولار يعطيه المالكي إلى قاسم سليماني. هناك خبر آخر جاء في الشرق الأوسط في صحيفة الشرق الأوسط يقول: على صعيد الدعم المالي الإيراني لسوريا بشار الأسد جعل لسان مصدر في التحالف الوطني العراقي. طبعا لا يسمى الاسم لأنه معروف. هذا كلامه حرفيا: إن السفير الإيراني في بغداد حسن دانايفر نقل رسالة شفوية من مرشد الثورة علي خامنئي والجنرال قاسم سليماني قائد فيلق القدس إلى قادة التحالف الوطني إلى مجموعة المالكي. تتضمن ضرورة دعم الرئيس السوري ماديا وبمبلغ مبلغ حدده ب10 مليارات دولار مشيرا إلى أن الطلب الذي جاء بصيغة أوامر قد وافق عليه المالكي باعتباره رئيسا للحكومة العراقية.
because he is the prime minister of the Iraqi government.
أعتقد أن هذين الرقمين ممكن أن
These two figures
يشرح لنا
can explain to us, we can tell us where the wealth of Iraq has gone and spent. We have to highlight these things actually. Yesterday,
بحضر الأموال مئات المليارات من ثروات الشعب الإيراني أيضا على يد خامنئي.
when we talked about actually this is the wealth of the Iranian
any
company.
comments or any? Yes, please.
There was a huge problem in metering the oil. And I know that KBR there was a conference in Paris, I think in 2011, under the auspices of the UN, and they said, how is it possible that KBR has not been able to solve a simple problem as metering the oil, a system that, you know, in every decent country exists to see how much oil floats out of the country. It's okay to mention the corruption of the Iraqi government, but the initial corruption comes from the Americans. You just have to read the reports of the Special Inspector General of the Reconstruction and so on. So they learned the trade from the Americans, basically. I think this should be mentioned. But the metering system, is that solved, yes or no?
Yes, please.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for this. I don't know exactly what to tell you on this argument because I'm not quite informed. I'm more informed about the influences on oil prices and financial markets. So on technical aspects, I don't know exactly what to tell.
The oil has been stolen.
Okay, so Musab.
Hi. You talked about the inadequacies of the storage, pipeline and pumping capacities. Was the Iraqi government investing in this part of the oil production process before the rise of ISIS and before the current humanitarian catastrophe? Because I can understand that they don't have the budgetary capacity right now, but were they making this a priority before this current crisis? And if not, what do you think the main impediments were for these investments? Thanks.
As far as I know, the most investments were made in the north part. And from my point of view, as a researcher and economist, it was normal to be in the north part because it was the shortest way to bring oil from the Middle West to the Europe part and to the Asia. So maybe this was the strategy. But right now, because of the context, they have to think to the south part.
Okay, the Senator.
I'm not going to address the really contemptible comments that the United States bears any responsibility for corruption in Iraq because it's so outrageous it doesn't deserve comment. Only to suggest that, in fact, on the contrary, at the moment, our Congress has been conditioning continued assistance on Iraq's ability to control its own corruption. It is a problem indeed so far as military assistance. Continuing to provide weapons that the Iraqi army ends up selling on the streets or to its adversaries. Economic assistance, which seems to be finding its way to the pockets of Iraqi officials. I would suspect historically the theft from the Iraqi people probably began by various Iraqi governments before there was the United States. And if there is an influence at the moment to correct it and stop it and have resources go for national defense and for the Iraqi people, of the various institutions which would be positive in doing that, the United States government would, without a doubt, be among the leaders of it.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, any comments in the podium? Any other questions? Okay, Sabah, you wanted to make some statement, yes, please.
I think probably it was not fair for Mihaela to ask her about Iraq. She did her study on the crude oil and the market and the international scene. I think on the Iraqi scene, perhaps I could add something on that one. Iraq is an oil-dependent country throughout its recent history over the last 50, 60 years. During the monarchy time, the First Republic, Second Republic, etc. So one can look at the Iraqi oil revenue over probably periods, like if one looks at the Iraqi oil revenues pre-1991, one can look at it between 91 and 2003, and the third period is post-2003. In the pre-91, there was a central government, which was a dictatorship and abuses of human rights, etc., but there was a central government. There was a government which was functioning. There were corruption, but to a smaller limit. There was pilferage, but it was confined to certain people. Between 91 and 2003, Iraq was under a siege. It was a Middle Ages siege. Nothing went in and nothing went out. Even the food was under what's called the Oil for Food program. And we all remember the issues of the oil coupones. And we had everybody accused, from the son of Kofi Annan to the French politicians, to the Russians, to the Americans, to the various Western powers, plus people. Post-2003, we have a different situation. There is a hell of a lot of money, both liquid, because the state disappeared, and there was the money which came from the American taxpayer through the Americans, and there was also the oil revenues. And obviously, when you don't have a central government or a government in control, and this applies even to the period where Ambassador Bremer was running Iraq. When one looks at the report of the Federal Audit Office about that period and how the money was spent and how it disappeared, it doesn't make very nice reading. If one looks at how the UN was dealing with the issue of the oil for food, it doesn't make very good reading either. And if one looks at the governments, it's really very, very disturbing. But one can look at the, I'm thankful to my friend, I think Mr. Haki gave some figures about the salaries of parliamentarians. A member of Iraqi parliament gets paid or costs the revenue more than the Speaker of the British Parliament. But we in Britain, we are proud because the Iraqi government is a British government. The President of the Republic is a British citizen. The Prime Minister is a British citizen. The Deputy Prime Minister is a British citizen. The Vice President is a British citizen. We've got 6 ministers who are British citizens. So Her Majesty actually has a better control of the government in Iraq than it has in the government in the UK. The Queen, right. The problem in Iraq, I think, I've made some comparison about the various governments from the time Iraq became independent in the 20s and 30s of the last century and to the current time. And when I looked at the period when Iraq was part of the British Mandate, at the monarchy time and the periods thereafter, Britain tried to set up a country in Iraq that is a survivable state, but belongs to us. The 2003 recreation of Iraq, occupation of Iraq, also tried to create a state, but it's a not survivable state. They signed, both the British and the Americans signed, make the Iraqis sign exactly the same treaties. King George VI and King Faisal I signed the defense treaty. The government in Iraq signed the SOFA agreement with the US. The British made the Iraqis sign the oil concessions, IPC, MPC, BPC. The oil scene we can see in Iraq now. But the government which came to Iraq in 2003, and I know a lot of the individuals, they were refugees in Britain, they were opposition leaders, etc., etc. Those people still do not believe in Iraq. Their families are living in Jordan and England and Dubai and everywhere. The people themselves, their families is living outside. The interest of the politicians in Iraq, all the politicians, no, there are too many politicians here, I better be careful. There is corruption among politicians everywhere in the world, from Japan to Europe. But there is a degree of corruption. The situation in Iraq, it is the most failed state. It is number 4 on the bottom of the list of Transparency International. It is a country where its assets, whether it's the cranes or the buildings or the army or the airplanes or the tanks, all the things that that country has spent money to buy it from 1920 and 30 until 2003 were sold or exported or given within 2 years. There's nothing. That country has collected hardware. We have one of the ministers who was a minister of defense in Iraq. He's a British citizen. He lives in London. In the Sunday Times, they said this guy has stolen $1 billion. And he did not sue anybody. He did not take any action against anybody. We have the Minister of Trade. He's in Britain. He is accused of all sorts of other things. So the corruption is to such an extent. In my young days, I served in Nigeria, and I thought it was hell on earth. But now I think it's heaven compared to what Iraq is. I'm not going to go into how they are spending the money, but whatever the figures, we're talking about the revenues in Iraq from 2003 until now. There is nothing to show for it. There are no roads, no bridges, no hospitals, no schools, no universities, nothing. The buildings which were destroyed or damaged in 2003 are still standing there. The Kurdish area, which is a semi-independent area, is flourishing with cranes and buildings and hotels and everything else. But the rest of Iraq, and this is not a sectarian thing. It's not a Shia or a Sunni or anything. This is people who just either don't know or don't care, or actually intentionally are just not spending the money on anything. Yet they are relying on the idea that they are recognized because there is a democracy, they came after election, and somehow the world seems to talk to the Iraqis as if election equals democracy. All the dictatorships in the Arab world, from Morocco all the way to Saudi Arabia, including Iraq and Egypt and Syria and the whole, they had elections every 4 years. And every 4 years, the result was 99%, 98%. So the election is not democracy. The prime minister in Iraq, under the constitution, and his ministers, under the constitution, have to answer questions to the parliament. They refuse. And within the parliament itself, it's not a parliament that represents Iraq or its people. Every member of parliament represents his tribe, his sect, his master, whoever, nobody looks at the interest of Iraq. Now, there was this issue of ISIS taking oil. And the problem was ISIS was going to go to Erbil. At the time, ISIS, when they took the oil fields, they began to extract oil and sell it to the following. They were selling it to the Syrian government. They were selling it to the Syrian opposition. They were selling it to the Turkish government. They were selling it to the KRG. They were selling it to Iran, and they were selling it to Maliki when he was there. All these deals, for them to go through, they were at the time going through the Kurdish leadership. I'm not going to mention names. It was going through the Kurdish leadership because they were the people who could arrange or could allow them. Then there was a decision, for whatever reason, that we are not going to allow ISIS to do that. And that is, so effectively, according to ISIS, the Kurdish region reneged on the agreement. That's when they decided to move toward Erbil. They are not interested in Erbil. This is a thuggery. This is an organization which is the worst in the last century. We've seen a lot of terrorist organizations. In my young days, there were the Red Brigade, Bader Meinhof, and all the rest of the... They didn't chop heads. They didn't burn people alive. Those people are taking the Iraqis as hostages, and the Iraqis are the victims of ISIS, those who are under the control of ISIS. Yet, we are treating them as if they are ISIS. So we want to liberate Mosul from ISIS. Mosul is a city with 2 million people. Probably they have some 5,000, 10,000 ISIS guys. How do you liberate that? How many people are you going to kill to try and liberate it? I think the present situation, there is the army collapsed in Iraq. The Hashd al-Sha'bi, or it's effectively the popular army, under an edict from Sistani that they should rise up to fight ISIS. This one is almost numbering 150, 130,000 people. The Iraqi army, which was 150, became 50,000. The Hashd al-Sha'bi are getting the money from the government. Mr. Mokhtar Lamani, who is the leader of one of the militias, actually formally announced that because the government is not giving them salaries, those fighters, because they are fighting terrorists and ISIS, they are entitled to take money from them as booties. This is the scene of the economy in Iraq. There is no, when one wants to talk about economy, you can talk about anybody. It's just like trying to talk about the economy of Somalia. Even in Afghanistan, you actually have some sort of an economy, whether it's tribal or whether it's local or whether it's government one. In Iraq, there's nothing. A friend of mine who lives in Mosul, he said, you think that now ISIS has taken over. He said, from 2003 until now, until ISIS came, he said, I was paying $100 a month to Al-Qaeda as protection money, and I was paying another $100 to the Maliki army and police for protection money. He said, when ISIS came, I'm $100 better off. He said, but I have a problem, because ISIS is now putting more restrictions on education, on children, on house, how you go. And not only that, they are not even providing the services they used to. When they first came, they restored electricity and water and some of the functional things. Now it's all stopped. So now the people in Mosul want to leave, but they're not allowed to leave. So you are a hostage of ISIS living in Mosul, and you have some intelligent people sitting somewhere in the world say, we want actually to liberate them. So what do? We get the Canadians and the Australians and everybody else and the UAE to bomb them because we are bombing ISIS. And we want to liberate them. And yesterday, I think one of my friends was talking about they must be eradicated and removed. And I agree, fully agree with that. But there is a slight problem with that is how? What do you do? You know, this idea that you bomb them from the air, ideology can never be bombed from the air. Ideology cannot even bombed from the ground, even if you put boots on the ground. Ideology is a different thing. You fight it a different way. Ideology is a symptom of something. You treat the cause, you get rid of the symptom. You treat the symptom, you don't get rid of the cause. And if you do it in Mosul, you get Fallujah, and you get Raqqa, and you get Syria, and you get North Africa, and you get Boko Haram, and you get eventually it'll go somewhere else, and in Yemen, and probably one of these days it'll get down to Saudi Arabia, and then we'll have a completely different issue. It is these things which I hope that we can think about it a little more realistically and a little more sensibly. The government in Iraq from 2003 until now, they got more funds than the previous governments over a period of probably 20 years. And they have nothing to show for it. And this is not politics. I'm talking about facts. It's very simple. One can have a look at how many buildings were there, how many ministries, how many schools, how many hospitals. What is the health service there? What's the education system? Forgetting about the security aspect. That is when you make people, when you do things so badly, you make people choose between two evils. And they make a comparison between this evil and the previous one. So you end up with the people under ISIS saying we want to get rid of ISIS, but please, you're not going to bomb us, nor are you going to bring us the people who are going to take the money from our houses and kill us. That is the government. And certainly they don't own foreign troops. It doesn't matter. I think my friend yesterday said that he could send Egyptian army. You know, this is a load of hot air. Britain talked about taking part in it. We debated a whole day in Parliament, and we had a vote, and we agreed that we're going to go with the coalition. You know what we're talking about? In Britain, we have 6 tornadoes that are stationed in Cyprus. These 6 tornadoes, every day, every other day, I don't know, they fly over, they go to Turkey, they go over Iraq, and if they find a truck to bomb, they will bomb it. If they don't, they'll come back. That is our contribution. There is a coalition of 60 countries. I don't know, you know, I can find out who they are. But certainly the European countries, the US, and Canada, right, and the Arab countries. I don't know whether those people are really serious about it, or is it just like the coalition of the willing in 2003 when Senegal was brought in to help with the liberation of Iraq. And I'm sure the USA Army did not really need Senegal. But they sent Senegal, they asked Senegal, so that we can say it was the coalition of the willing 32 countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sabah, for your presentation.
To take that further is what we saw yesterday in discussions and today is that we have seen a political and economic collapse in Iraq that are giving the Iraqis the choice between two evils. And that is unacceptable. And we have got to really start from a point now of laying out a positive vision for Iraqis and giving them a real choice to move forward.
I'm told that our time is over for this session, but let me conclude with a joke that an Iraqi friend told me about corruption you mentioned. I think in one of the years, Iraq was the second one in corruption by the organization Transparency. And a friend of mine told me, do you know why we are the second and not the first? I said, no. I said, because we corrupted Transparency to put us the second. On this note, thank you very much. So we have a coffee break for half an hour, then we will resume with the last session. Thank you very much.